Okay, everyone, we're going to get started with this session. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land, their elders past, present and emerging, and also acknowledge that today is a very important day as National Sorry Day. It's a moment where we can, recognise past injustices, particularly against the stolen generations, as well as celebrate the incredible resilience of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in the country. So let's start by acknowledging that. I'm Michelle Higelin and I'm the Executive Director of ActionAid Australia. We're a global organisation working to advance women's rights and end poverty and injustice. And I'm delighted to welcome you to the third in our speaker series on women leading climate action. Today's session is particularly focused on young women leading climate action around the world, and we're delighted to have three exceptional speakers this afternoon who we'll be introducing in a moment. Our focus today is really off the back of the global school strikes for climate and seeing young people mobilise around the country and around the world indeed, around climate action, and being very innovative despite a global health pandemic, really using innovative ways to connect and to remind us of the importance of taking urgent action on climate change. However, I don't know that we need reminders. This week alone, we've seen a very serious cyclone of Bengal affecting more than 3 million people in India and Bangladesh. We've also had a cyclone in the Pacific a month ago and a very severe food crisis in Southern Africa. And it's a reminder that as we fight COVID-19, that the climate crisis is, far from over. And in fact, many countries where we work as ActionAid are facing a triple threat of, climate, economic and health crises. However, this series is designed to really bring a spotlight to, women leading climate change, and particularly to highlight diverse voices in Australia and overseas who are taking action on climate change and reminding us how important it is for us to find solutions to this crisis. We have less than 10 years to avert catastrophic climate change. It's being hosted by ActionAid and Women's Agenda. For those of you who are new to ActionAid, we support women on the front lines of crisis, whether that be the climate crisis or COVID-19. At the same time, we campaign here in Australia on climate justice, and particularly are trying to build an economy that cares for people and planet. And we're delighted today that you'll have a chance to hear more about that work. Women's Agenda, for those of you who are new to Women's Agenda, it's a vital news source for women around the country and focuses on making sure more women get heard on the issues that matter. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Angela Priestley, who's our host for today. Angela is the Editorial Director of Women's Agenda. So over to you, Angela.
Hi, well, thank you so much, Michelle. And it's amazing to be here for another Women Leading on Climate Action series. This is our third, and we're really lucky. We're really picking up a lot of momentum and interest in these conversations, which I think is particularly incredible at this time, given we know that so much of the world is preoccupied, but we also know that we can't take our focus off the climate crisis. And as Michelle said, we've seen disasters just in the recent weeks, which explains why. So we know that we need to keep the lessons on leadership on COVID-19 also in mind. And one such lesson has been the power of female leadership at this time and the need to ensure a diverse range of people and experiences are around the table. This is not the time to defer to the status quo or to the most business experienced person in the room. We need a mix of voices to get through these challenges. So Women's Agenda is a daily news publication that really focuses on women from a career, leadership and opportunity perspective. And some people may be surprised to know that really everything we do and cover, from childcare to looking at women on boards to domestic violence and women's education and workforce participation, it's all underpinned by climate justice and our belief that effective climate action and the economic reset we need will come from getting more girls educated, more girls and women heard, and more women into power. So it's exciting to be here this afternoon to address the need for and the power of young women's voices, particularly, especially after seeing how these voices, particularly female voices, are managing to cut through the noise to find, a place at major international conferences, to lead on global movements, and to organise locally. So I've got 3 guests here to speak about this. I also wanted just to acknowledge everybody following along at home. I want to make this, well, we like to make this an interactive experience, so I'd love for you to just share in the chat box where you are, what's going on in your part of the world at the moment, what city, what town, wherever you are, just share where you're at. If you've maybe got a glass of wine or a glass of water or whatever you're doing, what's going on in the background there, feel free to shout it out and let us know, because it's really nice to see that interaction and what you're all doing there, until we're able to one day do these events in person, which we hope to get to that point as well. But in the meantime, having these events online does mean that we get to have international guests, and it means that we get to have interstate guests, and make it all a little bit easier on ourselves as well. So that works too. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Firstly, starting with Katherine too. Now, Katherine Orkut is the head of policy and campaigns at ActionAid Australia. She has 10 years experience working in the progressive campaign space, with expertise in digital campaigning, corporate campaigning and community organising. How are you, Kat?
I'm doing really well, thanks, Angela.
Joining from Melbourne. One of our second guests today is Evelyn Ashen, and Evelyn is a passionate climate justice activist from Uganda who organises climate strikes. She is the National Ugandan Coordinator of the Rise Up movement and an active member in the Youth for Future Africa group. Evelyn is also active with Fridays for Future, the international movement of school students striking for bold climate action. Hello, Evelyn. How are you? Joining us from 9:30 in the morning there.
Hi.
And our third speaker
Thanks
is
for
Clare.
having me here.
Our third speaker is Clare Ainsworth, and Clare is the Groundswell co-founder. She also co-founded the Climate Council Heron Island research trip with Anna Rose in 2017, and subsequently the pair started Groundswell. Clare has over 12 years experience in not-for-profit development and philanthropy. She is a director of the Art Gallery of New South Wales Foundation and on the advisory council for the Sydney Women's Fund. She's also a member of the Australian Environmental Grant Makers Network and the Global Climate Reality Leadership Corps. Hello, Clare.
Hello, Angela.
Okay, and from home, let's have a look at this little panel here. So inner west of Sydney, in Melbourne, a few more in Sydney. Wow, it's going quite fast for me now. Okay, so from Kenya, that's from the Blue Mountains. So thank you everybody for sharing that. I'll continue to keep an eye on that. Also from Hong Kong, I saw that this is a truly global audience. So that's amazing to see. Welcome everybody. Okay, so I would like to just start by opening a question to all 3 of our panelists. And Kat, I might direct it at you first of all. But just to get us started, perhaps you just start by sharing how you personally got involved in climate action. What really motivated you to get involved, Kat?
Yeah, so from a young age, I've always been interested in issues of justice, and climate change is fundamentally an issue of justice. You have people who've least contributed to the problem and who have the least resources to adapt to those who are being hit the hardest. And a bit about my background is that I'm the daughter of 2 refugees who came from South Vietnam, and they were lucky enough to get asylum in Australia during the 70s. And my parents really brought me up with a sense of how lucky I was to have all the privileges in my life, such as safe housing. I got a great education. We always had enough money to pay for the things that we needed. And from that background, I really got a strong moral responsibility to feel like I have to use my privilege in life to stand in solidarity with others and push for change that is meaningful for people and makes a difference in people's lives, particularly for those overseas. And as a person of colour, there are people like me who are facing some of the most devastating impacts of climate overseas. And so that really moves me to do more on climate change. And I first got my taste of climate action is with the Australian Youth Climate Coalition. And they're a group of wonderful young people pushing the boundaries of what we can do to get progress on climate change.
When did that happen? So, and what's it like being involved in that group? How often?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
So that happened, that was probably about more than 10 years ago in which I got involved, and I got involved through university. They are great because they run a lot of trainings for young people, and they provide a lot of transformative experiences. So through that, I was able to meet lots of people who had common values to me, and then also take really concerted action on climate change. I got to go to a UN conference in Durban on climate change as well, and really have exposure to all the levels of decision making that happen on climate action. And through that, I think I realized that just it's mainly through people power that I think we're going to be able to create the change that we need by working together with others and being able to create enough power to be able to get the policy change and to move corporations in the right direction.
Okay, what about you, Evelyn? What was your real turning point to look at being motivated to get involved in climate action?
My journey to climate action is an interesting one. Several experiences brought me here. First of all, I grew up in a country that experiences tropical kind of climate. And the tropical kind of climate involves the rainy and dry seasons. So I thought this was a norm globally. Then also, as the education system did not do me justice, since it does not emphasize the urgency in climate action. And also the president and the government has done much, but I'm still disturbed by the fact that the law in Uganda does not strongly address the climate justice and accountability. What hit me in the head most was when I watched Vanessa Nakate's individual strikes on the streets of Kampala. Seeing the passion and the vigor this young woman had for the planet triggered my interest. Having had an exchange with her on various platforms, I decided to do research, and here I am doing climate strikes and action.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my next question, was how you got an understanding of the issue. If you mentioned that it's not part of the education system there, so you really had to go out and do that on your own, did you?
Yeah, I saw that part of the education system because they simply talk about they simply polish the surface of climate change, but they don't go into detail to explain what exactly climate change is, the impacts. So that's why I decided to start taking climate action, and also extend my voice to other people to join.
Okay, and what about you, Claire? What was your moment that motivated you to get involved?
Well, what sustains me is definitely that I've got 2 young children, but when I originally got involved, it's interesting because my background was in the arts and I was working in the arts at the time, and I think it really speaks to the power of storytelling, because my aha moment came in the form of a film. So many years ago, maybe 6 years ago or more, there was a film called Chasing Ice. And I had a friend who was working for Greenpeace who did a screening. And I went to the screening having seen The Inconvenient Truth. Climate change was on my radar. It felt like something that was it felt really abstract, I think, back then. It felt like something that was going to happen in the future, that possibly wouldn't see the worst of the impacts in my lifetime. And I remember seeing this film, which is about, they're chasing ice. It's a film basically about the receding ice in the glaciers around the world. And I remember sitting there eating my popcorn, and there's this scene where a glacier shelf carves. So when ice shelves drop off, it's called calving. And this carving was the size of Manhattan, and this enormous mass of ice, this historic piece of ice, just dropped into the ocean, never to be seen again. And it was a very dramatic, drawn out process. And it was actually quite beastly the way that it happened. And it was like a dying beast. And that really drove it home for me, that while I was eating my popcorn, even if I couldn't see it, it really was happening. And certainly more recently, since the bushfires and the droughts that we're experiencing, we are now here in Australia experiencing firsthand the impacts of climate. So yeah, I made a decision that night to use my existing skills. Was very much so like, but what can I do? I work in the arts, but very quickly realised that I was able to apply them over in the environmental space for climate action. I was working with young philanthropists and running a dynamic program series at the Art Gallery of New South Wales to engage them with the cause and with the arts. And so I just basically replicated that for climate and began my climate action journey by taking groups of philanthropists to the Heron Island research station up on the Great Barrier Reef with Anna Rose. And it's all gone from there.
Yeah. So what kind of, I mean, what age were you when you had this moment? And I mean, it sounds like in that case, it really was like a switch flicked on for you, which really does show the power of film, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is very much so. And I think because I had already been working in the not-for-profit space and development and philanthropy, I'd had quite a lot of experience in different causes, and very much so a part of that aha moment was recognizing, I guess a bit of a chicken and the egg proposition. What do you address first? There's so many existing problems in the world, and I guess my realization was that everything that I cared about, whether it was refugees, human health, the environment, all of those existing issues were only going to be exacerbated by climate change. So to have, I just felt like that's where I needed to focus my efforts and begin there.
Mm-hmm. A reminder, everyone at home, thank you for sharing where you are, and it's great to see such a huge mix of people from around the world. So Evelyn, I'd like it if you could just talk us through what's happening in Uganda at the moment. How are the impacts of the twin crises of climate change and COVID-19 being experienced in Uganda there, and particularly among young women?
Very many women are walking long distances to go to work and to access health services due to the presidential directive banning private and public transport as a measure to prevent the spread of COVID-19. This has led to an increased rate in mortality rates in pregnant women. For example, once Kovia Nakawoya died in labor as she was walking to hospital, and also recently a lady drowned to death in Kampala in one of the drainages because of the floods that overflooded the drainage. So the lady drowned and she died. May their souls rest in peace. Then also hundreds and thousands of women and their families have been forced into squalid, overcrowded camps, churches and mosques, and schools by rising water floods. Vital infrastructure across the world has also been destroyed, like roads and hospitals, causing women to have no access to these hospitals. There's also difficulty in accessing the healthcare services, and this has increased the risk of families contracting COVID-19 and other related diseases like cholera, malaria, and dysentery. There's also the heavy rains and floods, also coupled with the ongoing locust infestation, and we see that most of the finances are being addressed to fight COVID-19, and the locust infestation is not being attended to, which is exposing very many women who are vulnerable to circumstances like starving to death because they don't have food, and pregnant women with poor diet have an increased risk of illness, which can impact their unborn babies and development and health. Then there's also an increased rate of domestic violence amidst COVID-19 pandemic, which is caused by disagreements in households as a result of lack of finances, which has left people home. As a result of lack of finances, Then the floods have also left people homeless, which has highly contributed to an increased rate of rural communities giving away their daughters. Then also, there's also a rise in teenage pregnancy and child marriage in exchange for money to feed their homes. That teenagers are idle and spending so much time with boys, which is causing a high chance to pregnancy due to poverty as a result of food being destroyed by floods. The girls are given away in exchange for money.
Wow, it's just this, thank you for outlining that, because this is part of the conversation that we don't hear enough. We like to think that we're making progress on gender equality and some of the issues that you're talking about, particularly around child marriage and domestic violence and girls' education and that sort of thing. But if we can't take climate action, we cannot address those issues. We cannot get anywhere close to gender equality. I think that we all need to be reminded over and over again that gender equality internationally, it depends on the action that we can take on climate change, or these things are only going to get worse. Thank you for outlining that. It's really shocking to hear. I wanted to ask you just quickly also still on COVID-19, what is the situation with schools being open? Are they closed? And workplaces, can people go to work at the moment? What's it like in that regard?
Yes, currently schools are still closed until further notice, and some companies have closed up until further notice. Then also most of the workers, including women, have been laid off, because of the current situation of COVID-19, which has put the economy at stake.
Okay. Okay. Do you have concerns with some of those girls being out of school at the moment? Do you have concerns that some of them won't ever be able to return? I mean, I look at this in terms of a place where it can already be a bit of a struggle for girls to get that education. Are there concerns that even once the pandemic subsides and the risk is alleviated, that those girls, do you think they'll be able to get back into school?
Yeah, there's a big concern and worry about some girls, or majority of girls, especially in rural areas, not going back to school. Yeah, because research has it that there's a high rate of teenage pregnancies currently, especially in rural areas. And by the time school opens, some girls will be pregnant, and also some parents, most of the parents have not been working. So these girls may lose their chance to go back to school because there's no money to pay school fees, and they'll end up being given away for marriage in exchange for money.
Okay. Well, thank you again for just outlining that for us and what the situation is like there at the moment. It's so important that we know and we get this understanding of it. Can I just now ask about your activism? So you're part of Fridays for the Future, as well as other movements of young Africans mobilising around climate change. What are you hoping to achieve through those mass mobilisations of young people around the world?
First of all, I'm hoping to create more awareness about climate change and its impacts. I want to do whatever it takes to make sure that leaders and public gets to know about climate change and take action. The biggest reason why people are not involved in climate change action is because people are not informed. They've not been given reason to go back and read more about climate change and join the movement. The world will change if people get to know this information that climate change is actually happening. We see early this month in the western part of Uganda, we saw floods in Kasese, and these floods affected everyone. They did not only affect the young people. Most people believe that climate action is only for the young, but I would like to continue creating this awareness that climate change is affecting everyone. Like we saw in Kasese, in the Kasese floods recently, that destroyed crops and affected everyone, all the older and the younger. Then also most of us aren't motivated to act because we think we're doing something very small. And we think that the small acts cannot impact or change anything. But I want to remind everyone that small acts, when multiplied by millions of people, can transform the world. How about we started with the small acts? Start by not cutting an existing tree. Start by planting a tree. Give yourself a target to plant a tree every month. Be faithful to that tree and take good care of it. Don't cut it when it grows. I'm also working on putting pressure on the government and companies to make system-wide changes. The government should listen to the scientists. I realize that our leaders are not informed about climate crisis. An example of currently when Lake Victoria levels rose and it led to floods, which submerged homes. And one of the leaders in the government mentioned something that was so interesting. This is what he said: God has decided to speak, and in the most dangerous way. So imagine this leader thinks that Lake Victoria is flooding because God is punishing them. And this is the problem. The leaders are not informed. They're not informed about the exact cause of the floods, the exact cause of the rise in sea levels. I wish our leaders knew about climate change. Most officials are assuming the cause of floods. Some are saying it's because of heavy rains. The first time Lake Victoria flooded was in 1964. And this was because it was raining consistently from 1961 to 1964 for 3 years. So the levels rose to about 13.32 cubic meters. But currently we see that the levels of Lake Victoria have risen so fast in a period of 6 months. That is since October last year to date. And currently the level is at 13.32 cubic meters. So I'm encouraging I want to encourage the leaders to listen to the science, and everyone, the public, listen to the scientists, listen to what's happening around us. I'm also hoping to take that climate action awareness to schools. As I mentioned earlier, the education system does not sensitize students about climate change and its impacts. Starting climate, I'm also planning on starting climate clubs in schools. And also, we hope to promote the use of renewable energy as an alternative to reduce the dependence of firewood for cooking. For example, there's already a project going on in rural schools, which is being headed by Vanessa Nakate, that involves the installation of solar stoves. Then I would also encourage people that our daily decisions matter too, the daily decisions within our reach, especially during this period of lockdown. We can start a conversation with people about climate. You can start it with your family, because your family will listen to you more because they trust you. You can start a small conversation about climate and explain to them what exactly is happening around us and the causes and impacts of climate change. Then I also plan on encouraging more use of politically active. I'm also planning to encourage the youth to be politically active, to vote.
Sorry, we're just losing
the youth making.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Pardon?
Oh no, I just lost you there for a second. Yes.
Seeing youth making headlines and using their energy, raising their voices together of climate change.
Yeah. Claire, that really brings me to you, is raising voices together of climate change and that collective action. I wanted to take to looking at philanthropy and looking at younger generations of philanthropists. How are you seeing them getting behind climate action, and how maybe is that shifting compared to, say, 10 years ago? Oh, you just need to unmute yourself. Yeah, I did it too.
First of all, I don't think I can answer that question without acknowledging Evelyn. That's extraordinary what you've just shared with us. And I'm just so grateful that there's people like you doing the work that you do. So thank you. on that note, you asked what a young philanthropist's doing, and I think that really raises the question of how do you define philanthropy? Mm. And certainly we're trying to redefine that through Groundswell. Philanthropy, if you look at the original meaning of the Greek word, means for the love of humanity. And it's people like Evelyn, it's the kids who are striking the Fridays for Future, the youth strikes. They very much so are the modern example of what philanthropy can be. At Groundswell, because they're taking climate action for the love of humanity as well as our natural world. At Groundswell, we acknowledge that giving comes in different currencies, whether that be time, treasure, and talent. And certainly the people who attend rallies are giving their time. I know an amazing young lawyer who's doing pro bono work for Extinction Rebellion. There's artists and designers doing work. In the climate space, there's lots of people giving their talent. And for those people that are able to put in some treasure as well, Groundswell's also trying to redefine what philanthropy looks there, but is more similar to traditional philanthropy, where it's not, and I hesitate to say this, but I think often when you think of a philanthropist, probably people picture in their mind, if it were a cliche, would be a rich, old, probably white man, older anyway. But yeah, to sort of encourage people to know that we can all be philanthropists, that we, the younger generation, can actively participate in shaping our own futures, and that if we can collectively donate together, then we can achieve huge impact. At Groundswell, the entry point is $20 a week, and understanding that $20 a week is still significant, but I think most people would feel like they couldn't change the world alone with $20 a week. But when you pull those resources together, like we have at Groundswell, you can fund really strategic, high impact climate advocacy and action, which is what we're doing at Groundswell.
Okay, let me just keep my microphone on. That issue as well. I think, like other people, we've got kids and things in the background that are screaming downstairs. So, Claire, with Groundswell, I believe it was launched last year. Is that?
So actually, no, our official launch, and we had a big event at the Royal Botanic Gardens in Sydney, was in February of this year, so just before the lockdown.
Okay, I remember seeing the photos of it. It feels like it was a year ago. I think that's everyone's doing at the moment. So, okay, so it was launched in February. So are you finding the momentum to getting people involved? I mean, that's just after the Australian bushfires, so I know that there was a lot of people looking for something to do, but have you felt like you've lost much momentum? Is the interest to engage in this as strong as you thought it would be given the pandemic?
Yeah, so definitely off the back of the bushfires, I think a lot of people had been feeling like, what can I do? And for a lot of people, we were able to answer that question. And so we had a really encouraging response. Ariel, my colleague, put a post up on Instagram over the bushfires, and we had a couple of thousand followers. It felt like overnight. It was definitely within, a couple of days. And then for our launch, we had 400 people come. We have got $250,000 committed to date. We've got over 200 members. So it was all tracking really well, and it was definitely because off the back of the bushfires, it was something that everybody was thinking really deeply about. With COVID, our last grant round at Groundswell, our small grant went to the Climate and Health Alliance, and I think that's been really quite strategic to support their work during this time, because the health professionals have the ears of the world at the moment, and they are able to draw those very real links between the health of the planet and the health of humans. And even just yesterday, a group of senior leading health professionals across Australia signed an open letter to the federal Minister for the Environment, calling on action because they can see the enormous ongoing impacts on human health if we don't address planetary health.
Yes, that's one thing, is that you're right, the health professionals have the ears, and the scientists, we're listening to the scientists on this. So that's
right. And that open letter was like, the first signature is Professor Peter Doherty, who is an Australian Nobel laureate, and he's an epidemiologist. So considering the moment that we're in, that's a very trusted voice, and we should be paying attention.
Yes. Kat, I'll go to you now, waiting patiently in Melbourne. So a few questions here, but about your work with ActionAid. I guess the first one would be just to ask how, with your work at ActionAid, you're engaging young women in Australia and campaigning for climate action at the moment.
Yeah, so we have activists, a group around the country, and we have a number of young, amazing women campaigning for climate action, and we work with them to come together based on common values and also a shared vision for a better present and future. And by working together, our activist groups are building the power necessary to get the change that we want to see in the world. So they undertake a whole bunch of autonomous and self-driven activities, such as holding events, meeting MPs and senators, doing stunts when it's not lockdown time, attending shareholder meetings. So all sorts of creative stuff, which helps us demonstrate the community support for greater climate action.
Okay. And I mean, some of the work that you're doing is tracking the impact of Australia's fossil fuel industry overseas, particularly in Africa. What are you seeing from that research?
Yeah, so our climate movement is very focused on domestic emissions, and that's really important. But what our research has shown is that we also need to be keeping an eye out on Australian fossil fuel companies that are operating overseas, and the impacts that has on women's rights and our climate. So we've done this sort of research for 2 years, tracking the carbon footprint of Australian stock exchange listed coal, oil and gas companies operating in low income countries. And what we've seen is that between 2017 and 2018, there's been a 13% increase in potential emissions. So to give you a sense of what that actually means, that's equivalent to 5 times Australia's annual greenhouse gas emissions. So that's a lot. And that's obviously occurring against a backdrop where we really need urgent climate action, not just in Australia, but globally. And that piece of research shows that we really need to be monitoring these corporations so we can hold them account. And it's not just that, there are devastating impacts on women as well. So for example, with one of the communities that ActionAid works with in South Africa, there's 15 mines, yet there are high levels of poverty and violence, and we're seeing girls dropping out of schools to join the sex trade, as well as significant impacts on health and livelihood. So pollution, contaminated water, and damage to housing. So a lot of the economic arguments that the mining industry is making in terms of bringing jobs and economic benefits to communities, that's not stacking up. And these corporations are operating far away from Australia, which means they're not having very much scrutiny at all. So if we're going to be tackling climate change, it's something that we really need to be keeping an eye on, because they're contributing a lot to global emissions.
Yeah. So when you say keeping an eye, like how can we do that? What can we do following on from home to try and keep track of what's going on? Because it'd be very easy to not know that that's happening at all.
Yeah, so you can follow the work of ActionAid, and also we work through our activist community and also through our online supporters. We work directly with women leaders from communities impacted by mining in South Africa. So in the past, we've worked with them to fund their ability to document the impacts of the mining on them. So documenting the increases in violence, and as I said, the contamination to water and cracks to housing. And then we can use this evidence to put these women's demands at the forefront. So campaigning with our activist community, but also with our online supporters as well, and people who want to get involved, we hold corporations accountable and support these women to seek redress. So in the past and presently, that's included engagement with corporations such as Resource Generation and South32, who are operating and have operated in South Africa. And that evidence has been very powerful in forcing companies to come to the table and engage with affected communities. And also some of this work has allowed us to block the financing of some of these projects overseas as well.
Yeah. Okay, well that's amazing. Great for us to try and keep track of, particularly to see how the power of that evidence can make such a big difference in, I suppose, negotiating with those companies to make sure those people on the ground get a better deal from them. So we have lots of questions coming through, and if you can, we'll try and get through as many as we can. I did want to just pose just a couple more to everyone, maybe just to have a few short answers here, and then we can get to heaps of these questions. It'd be great if you could put the questions in the Q&A box, but I'll keep an eye on both, so the chat and the Q&A box. And also, I mean, I noticed that like we do get some familiar names here from our previous sessions as well. So I think you're welcome, you know, if you want to share like your Twitter profile or something else, or if you want to share something that you're doing in this space, I think that would be great to do, because this is our networking event at the moment. So this is how we can do it. So feel free to do that. But I did just want to ask everyone on the panel, if you have a message to young women who are passionate about the environment, what's something they can really start to do now, particularly during this reset period that we're in at the moment? I'll go to you, Evelyn.
This is first of all to the young woman who's already doing climate action. I encourage you to keep going. Don't give up. Someone out there is watching and following your activities and being impacted. Look for like-minded people and exchange ideas and work together and encourage one another and love one another. Remember again that the small acts can cause a very big change when very many people join together. For the woman who has not yet started climate action, and you're not aware of what's happening, I want to assure you that the effects of climate change are happening already, which I mentioned earlier. I'll pose a question to you, lady listening to me. Are you affected when you see another woman dying in a crisis, especially in a vulnerable state? If you are, then what have you done about it? If you think you can't do anything, let me encourage you that you can. Start with the small acts. Listen to the science. Save the women out there by joining this fight against climate change. To get more ideas how to do this, you can follow some people and some of these climate change movements, see what they do and ask questions. And lastly, let the trolls keep trolling. This means that you're doing the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Let the trolls keep trolling. I agree. So, Claire, what would be your message to young women who are really passionate about the environment and want to get involved? Oh, you need to, Claire.
Sorry. Definitely echoing those sentiments, and to lift each other up and have each other's backs. That's really important. I think the thing, like from my experience, is sometimes I think it's okay to begin where you're at. You don't have to have a degree in climate science or ecology or other. Begin where you're at, connect with other good people, find your people. They might be existing groups. You might begin your own. And that's the thing for me with Groundswell. We co-founded Groundswell together. Like I started it with my two best friends. And I guess, we identified a problem, going back to your previous question about what's philanthropy looking like at the moment. I mean, only 2 to 6% of of giving, like the whole pie chart of charitable giving in Australia, only 2 to 6% of it goes to the environment, and even less of that to climate change. And we thought that was woefully inadequate given the scale of the challenge. And so me and my two best friends we founded Groundswell. And yeah, you'll be amazed what you can do together when you lean in with each other.
And that's so true. It's just go and find a group, find people, find one connection. It will start something somewhere. Join in one of these sessions. There's opportunities to connect and meet people who might be doing something that you might find that you can engage with. Kat, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I'd echo what the other people have said. I'd also say to work in solidarity, and I think that particularly in Australia, it's important for us to foster global connections and connect with other communities overseas working as well, because this is a global problem and I think we need to work towards a global solution. I'd also say we should all stay hopeful while also acting. Nothing is predetermined, and through this crisis I think a lot of us have seen that we have the opportunity to shape what the future looks like, and we should stay hopeful in order to be able to grab hold of that future and make it what we think it should be, and something just and sustainable.
Absolutely. Okay, so so many questions. I'll try, maybe we'll go for some short answers to see how we can get through as many as possible. I did see a good one. I can't remember exactly the wording now and I can't find it, of course, but about the role of consumers in driving climate action. It can be easy to think that your role won't actually make a difference at all when we think about some of the, the polluting these massive companies are doing. So how can we, what is the role of consumers? Can we really make a difference as a consumer by addressing our everyday habits, from how the energy that we're using, from the food we're eating, things like that? What do you think, Claire?
I do think it's really important, and we all need to be making more informed choices. I think what's been really interesting about this great pause that we've had is that, due to COVID, is to see how much we can soften our footprint on the world if we consume less. And also just realizing that we don't actually need to consume as much as we have. And this endless appetite for consumption and extraction is not something that's sustainable at all.
Yeah. Kat, another question here about building diversity in these different movements. So do you have any advice for making sure that we can build and create the diversity that we need in all these sorts of, if anyone's trying to build a group themselves, or some of the work that you do in ActionAid to make sure that you're engaging a diverse mix of women?
Yeah, that's a really tricky question, I think, because it is an ongoing project, I think, of social movements as well, to ensure that we're being inclusive and ensuring that the leadership is people who are most affected and we get behind their leadership and stand in solidarity with them. I'd say there's lots of readings online you can do to interrogate any assumptions we've made, or how our practices can be oppressive and how we can undo those and be more inclusive. And I would also say put people who are affected in leadership and give them a platform to lead, because I think that's also a good way of including other people who may look and sound like them, who might not be involved in your cause or have never been before.
Evelyn, we've lost Evelyn just for a moment. I'm sure she'll be back shortly, but I noticed there are a lot of questions, quick questions for Evelyn. That'd be great to hear her perspective on, including around women in leadership there. So looking at some of these other questions here, I've got Kiko here says, some women still take women as vulnerable to be helped. So vulnerabilities to be helped. So I'm not really reading this one correctly now, but how do you ever come across that in the idea that some women may feel like that they don't want to be seen as vulnerable in terms of being helped in these movements, or in terms of being connected in these movements?
I think Evelyn's back.
That was a question that got a little bit mangled for me as I was going from 3 different screens. So we'll get to some more. I'd love to get Evelyn's perspective on some of these questions, because they are great questions, but hopefully she will be back shortly. Okay, so Marlon here says there's a plethora of causes for climate change and community groups in need. So Claire, I might direct this one at you. What would be your advice on what causes individual can support that would create the biggest change? I mean, obviously, and we've heard how big the issue is here this afternoon. It's hard to know where to start, where you go in terms of how you can make the greatest impact.
Yeah, definitely. And Groundswell is definitely trying to answer that for people. We like to say we offer the service of being Cupid for climate, to help you decide where you would like to land. And some things will resonate more than others. But for us specifically at Groundswell, we are focusing on climate advocacy, which is slightly less tangible than some solutions like planting trees. But the power of advocacy is that it can actually change the game at a systemic place. So we can build a movement, change the story, shift the money, and change the politics. Those are the 4 points at which Groundswell works. And so we're also really interested in constituency groups, because those people, when you break it down into whether it's athletes for climate action or farmers for climate action, when you're speaking to your own community, it's those trusted voices. Evelyn was saying before, people are more likely to listen to their family and friends than science. I think the Australian Institute actually did a study where it showed that you're just as likely to listen to your friends and family as the CSIRO. So you really do have that. Anyway, those messengers are really important. In terms of funding climate advocacy, I can give you an example of the people that we funded to date, and that also relates back to that point about trusted messengers. Our first grant went out to the emergency leaders for climate action. That was over the bushfires period. You may have seen in the media the former Chief New South Wales Fire Commissioner, Greg Mullins, was very much so that trusted voice. And the Emergency Leaders for Climate Action is part of the Climate Council. So that first grant went to them because that was able to very much so shift the narrative around the bushfires and explicitly link them to climate change.
Yeah, that's where we had sort of, I think, a dozen or so come together and write an open letter. Was that, can you?
Yes, they did. Yeah. They did in the media. And then our next grant went to Seed Mob, which is young Indigenous leaders taking action on climate. And their focus is the fracking campaign up in the Northern Territory, which is a really important one. The carbon release from that is absolutely disastrous. It's 5 times the carbon reservoir of the Galilee Basin. So if you thought Adani was bad, this is really bad, and it's going to very heavily impact Indigenous communities. And then our other grant was to the Climate and Health Alliance that I mentioned before. So yeah, if you want to have a look at our website, it's groundswellgiving.org, and we do list some recommended organisations, and if you want to give directly to them, you can.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Okay, so we still don't have Evelyn back. She might be able to slip in the final few minutes. Otherwise, I'm sure with some of these questions, we might be able to get a written response that we can email out, which ActionAid will email out to those who registered to attend. We'll have a video recording of this session, and also we'll try to get through some more answers to these questions. Kat, we do have a question here about how we can, and Claire, I'm sure you might have an answer for this as well, but Kat, how do we overcome the frustration of a government that can appear oblivious to the issues as they are occurring right now? And I think many feel this way at the moment. So
yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I think it helps to take a long-term view of everything as well, and I think it's really important to celebrate the milestones that you do have, which is, it might not have anything to do with the government. It might be that, you know, you've talked to 5 people about climate change, or you've been able to grow your activist group 2-fold. I think those actions are really powerful. And yeah, I hear that it is extremely frustrating with a government that sometimes doesn't hear the concerns on climate change. But I do think there's a lot of great community actions happening as well. People are coming up with lots of creative solutions from companies that are using clean energy and thinking of different ways that we can do things. So I think I try and think of the community-oriented actions as well as thinking about how people are rising to the challenge of the crisis. I think that gives me a lot of hope. And change takes a long time and isn't always linear. And I think that's helpful to think about as well.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And we didn't get Evelyn back, but a few comments here noting how powerful how powerful she is, and that we really want to see her on the international stage more. So we hopefully we can get these comments to Evelyn as well. Michelle, Michelle Higelin should be back to close us off. Michelle, I think you're there somewhere. I think I
am here.
Hello.
Hi, Angela. I don't think you can see my video, but I'm definitely here.
Yeah, let me work on that tech in the background while you're speaking.
That's okay, no problem. But look, I just want to really say a big thank you to you, Angela, for moderating, but also to our amazing speakers, Evelyn, Kat, and Clare. I mean, it's been wonderful to hear your perspectives and you know, really the energy you're bringing to this challenge of responding to the climate crisis. So thank you all so much. And a huge...
Oh, sorry.
Am I here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're
all
a
of you.
panelist. Yeah.
Okay, I'll put my video back on. I can see it now. To all of you, thank you for joining us this afternoon. We hope you've enjoyed the conversation. We do intend to bring you hopefully one more of these speaker series while we still stay in lockdown, before we all return to work. So we'll send you more information about that. And in the meantime, if you'd like to know more information about the fossil fuel tracker that Kat mentioned, or any of our campaigns on climate change, please do visit ActionAid's website, actionaid.org.au. And you can also find out more about our efforts to support women on the front lines of the climate crisis, particularly through our work under the Arise Fund, where we're scaling up support for women to prepare for and respond to climate change and related emergencies. And do stay with us when we come back with another one of these, because it's great to have a platform and space to hear from diverse women's voices around climate change. But I hope you all have a good evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.